can see some of them have their lights on. So good evening and good morning and good afternoon for especially our American friends out of the side of the pond. Good morning to you all. This is another series of another chapter of our Delenta Elevate series. Delenta Elevate series specially made for coaching community elevate their coaching businesses. So we are bringing coaches from our community to share their wisdom. So today we got a special guest to talk about a very important topic. Topics sometimes we basically love. I also have a hate relationship, right? From the consumer end, we love to talk about GDPR because we don't want to give our data away. And from the business point of view, we are quite nervous when it comes to whether we're going to doing the right things, right ways, we're trying to follow the right protocol, privacy policies, etc. So today, Lisa are going to clarify all that for us. Lisa, good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here for us.
Hello, hi Sam, hi everybody. It's lovely to see you all here today. It's quite a big crowd, I think. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. I myself am a coach, so I've been coaching for a couple of years, and on my day job, sort of 3 days a week, I work for a really big company, international education company, and I'm the data protection officer, so I know it from both ends. So hopefully I'll be able to reassure you about some of the things you need to do. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have no doubt. Lisa even helped us and personally myself with Delenta in some of these areas to iron out. So I'm sure you will add a lot of value, and we really appreciate that you're spending next hour with us and sharing your wisdom. And you're also certified, GDPR, like privacy.
Yeah, I can tell you all about that. I mean, that's the thing, as you're saying, Sam. It's one of those things that people are a little bit frightened of on the one hand, but on the other hand, they want to be able to assert their rights as an individual to protect their own data. So it's very mixed up. And I guess we've got quite a lot of international participants here today as well. So
absolutely.
So although I'm going to be talking about GDPR from memory, actually, that's a really good benchmark for other international regulations too. So there will be some relevance, I think, depending on where you are. We can go through some of the issues if there are specifics to different nationalities.
Excellent. Okay, folks, keep your questions ready, and next hour going to be very, very interesting. And before we jump into actual demo, what I thought, actual, speech, what I was thinking is to give you a little bit of background to Delenta, because there are some of the folks basically joining with us today, not being part of our community, but I can see Krishna, so he's one of our community members, and few other Sandeep and others as well. So what I do is, let me quickly, very quickly give you a background to Delenta, so you understand what we try to solve as a problem and what our company is doing, and then we can hand over to Lisa for her session. So Delenta is all-in-one, one-stop shop almost for coaches, because we see lots of coaches having one problem when they're building their business. The problem we try to solve is something like this. This is a coaching business look like, right? It's like a scribble. You have emails in one place, invoicing, billing going on, client management need to be done, and then you have courses, more client engagement, scheduling. It's just never ending in one hand, and you're a one individual business, and to handle all this by yourself is almost impossible. That put you off by coming to coaching or doing coaching, which what you really enjoy doing. So what we are doing is we try to simplify that process. So how we do it is very simple. We actually bring all these solutions into one place. So when somebody book an availability with you through Delenta, it creates records in Delenta as well. And then basically when you're managing your clients, your notes, your documentations, your resources can stay on Delenta. We are also bringing on our digital courses and events platforms together. So you can basically have all your engagement in one place. So this is how it looks like when you basically have everything set up on Delenta. You can bring your Outlook, Google Calendar into platform and can work with our calendar. You can basically have your payment and Stripe coming in and work with our coaching package creation process. And all these things work really well and play together in one platform that saves so much time that you're bounce between systems and also learn different systems. So that's what we're actually doing to some simplified process. So very quickly for benefit of our community, I thought I'll basically give you a little bit of brief on upcoming features, especially our Delenta users will be really happy to hear a recent basically published our mobile app demo of the app coming up very soon. This is basically coming up in August. So we are testing right now, and we are inviting you for a beta group. Online courses are coming up, so the online course will be available in mid-August for you to create courses and share with your clients and also sell within the platform. And also white label solution, which means this is one of the areas that Lisa and I was talking about, how we can, entirely white label the solution for your clients, and from the purchasing to onboarding, management of clients. So it's entirely your responsibility when it comes to, when it comes to your positioning, your branding in front of your potential clients and your existing clients. So that's all happening. And that basically bring all together as a one solution. That is Delenta, if somebody is interested. We have a live Q&A every Friday happening. So Juliana from my team, so basically our team, she's gonna share a few links, I think. So if you're interested in more about learning Delenta, you can book a demo with us, or you can basically participate on Q&A on Fridays as well. So on that note, I'm gonna pass the mic over to Lisa, and happily, and so next 45 minutes also gonna be very interesting, and yeah, feel free to ask your questions. And just sort of before I pass the mic, this is again just a sort of heads up. This is not a legal advisory service that we are providing. So this is not a formal advice. So this is use this as a guidance. When you're listening to Lisa and her ideas, and also from communication perspectives, Lisa, we are happy to ask questions to the chat, so Juliana can pick that up and ask those questions from you, right? Is that okay, Lisa? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yes, we can see.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much. Again, lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming. So as I've said, I've been a coach for a couple of years, but I'm also a data protection officer. I'm currently doing my ICF route to ACC accreditation, so I'm hopefully on a similar path to some of you. I've been coaching for a couple of years. Having spoken to a lot of coaches, I have found that data protection is regarded as either very, very scary or just boringly tedious by everybody else. So I'm hoping that if we can't make it interesting, we can at least demystify the topic for some of you. So I hope that will make a difference to you. So as I said, I've been a data protection officer for about 4 years, and I got thrown into it with my company. I've been working for them for about 18 years. And then GDPR appeared on the horizon, and I, in my company panic of being the conscience of the company, decided we ought to pull a project together. And I found out that we were about 20 years behind in terms of data protection practice. It's a really big job. It's very complicated for this very international company that I work for. But I've also got support from legal and IT specialists. So I've got other people to draw upon. It's very different when you're a sole trader or a small business owner, a sole coach. And as Sam said, I must caveat this presentation by saying I'm not a lawyer. I won't give legal advice, and anything I recommend, and you produce any documents or anything, you really ought to get them checked over by a legal professional. But if you can get a head start on what you need to put together, that will save you a lot of time and money, and you'll know what you're getting. So I do work with coaches on some of these basics, should you need any help. So let's start off with what seems to matter most to coaches. I did a bit of research with some colleagues recently, and these are some of the themes that came up. They're talking about fines and bureaucracy and data breaches and loss of reputation and damage to your company. All these things are super scary. So over this session, we're going to go over the key things that you need to have in place to demonstrate a realistic and appropriate level of compliance. And I'm going to give you some guidance on some of the least painful ways to go about it. So a little bit of history, not very much, it's a bit tedious. I'm sure nobody's going to forget 2018 when our inbox is all filled up with 1 million requests to opt in to some marketing or to read a new privacy policy. And it was quite a momentous time. GDPR was the most thorough overhaul of data protection legislation in 20 years. And it takes a different tack. It's squarely aimed at protecting the rights of the individual. But it's all the fines that frightened everybody, the prospect of 4% of global turnover that has frightened everybody. And if your turnover isn't that big either, then it's going to be a big panic for you. So hence the panic button. And just to be very clear, when I'm talking about data protection, it includes GDPR and the UK Data Protection Act of 2018, which also incorporates this new thing called UK GDPR. When I talk about the EU, I also now mean the EU and the UK post-Brexit. And those principles still continue to apply to our UK-based companies. If you are targeting organisations or people in the EU, in Europe, in the UK, and any of the particular countries that follow the GDPR, this is really important for you as well, because you may have your own data protection legislation in your country, but you still need to abide by GDPR if you're targeting citizens, residents of Europe. And I think, to be fair, GDPR is one of the most extensive forms of data protection of recent years. And so it's a good benchmark for most nationalities as well. Hope you're all with me so far. So this is the bit that you'll be interested in. We're looking at how does GDPR apply to coaching? And it may feel like some of the requirements of GDPR are confusing and disconnected from your day-to-day practice as a coach. But if you think about taking the time to examine your relationship with your client's data and what you're processing, then you can demonstrate compliance with the legislation. And this in turn will give your clients the peace of mind that you're treating their personal data with the same care and respect that you regard your coaching relationship. And I think that's really crucial. You're in a position of great authority and trust with your clients, and this is another way to demonstrate that as it runs through everything that you do. So on this list on the screen is what we're going to cover today. It feels like a lot, and we may just be scratching the surface, but hopefully I can provide some reassurance and guidance on some of the steps you need to take. And we'll be picking up some of the questions throughout the session if we can, if they're relevant, or we can wait till the end and I'll pick them off at the end. So whichever works best, I'm sure Juliana and Dania can let me know. So I'd like to reassure you that a lot of this will feel like common sense. So let's recap on what is personal data. And it's really important that you know it's information that can be used to identify a living individual. So think about people whose data you process. You may be thinking about clients. You may have employees. If you're a big company, you may have suppliers. And in your day-to-day work with them, you may be processing their personal data to deliver your service, to send invoices and receive payment, to verify the hours that you've logged. Maybe you're logging them towards accreditation, which I know you can do in Delenta, and to market your experience, to send marketing materials, and to differentiate yourself from other coaches. If you have anonymous information, it really does need to be entirely anonymous for it not to be able to identify somebody. If you can add it to some other data and identify somebody through that, then it still counts as personal data. Okay. And here are some of the basic types of information that you may be keeping. So if you're keeping customer records, you're using mailing lists, email addresses, you're probably keeping quite a range of personal data items. So the grid on the left is a pretty standard example of the main types of data you'll be processing as a coach. So if you've got a database or a CRM system like Delenta, you've connected your finance records maybe through Stripe, you're using MailChimp. All of these third parties are processing personal data as well on your behalf. And just to highlight the items on the right-hand grid in those squares, that's special category data. So it's possible that as a coach, you might be keeping some record of health data, depending on the type of coaching that you're involved in. So you may have some medical information there. You may have things about religion, for example. So that needs to have an extra level of security. So you would need a particular legal basis to process that and another reason for processing the data. And often this is consent. And just as a guide, I would say consent would largely be used for marketing consent, consent to be marketed to, or for processing special category data like medical data. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Okay. And as I said before, GDPR is very much aimed at protecting the rights of the individual. So it's good for you to be aware of what rights you have as a data subject, an individual. You need to be aware that if an individual asks you what personal data you're processing about them, there are formal requirements for how you must respond. And usually you need to respond within 30 days. It can get quite complex. It doesn't need to be if you're only processing very basic information and information they would expect. And of course, you'll have given them information about what that's likely to be in your privacy notice. But the best source of information for dealing with those kind of queries is the Information Commissioner's website, the ICO website. I can give you details of that at the end. That is the supervisory authority for data protection in the UK. In each European country, there is a different supervisory authority. And as I said, there are other regulatory efforts in other countries as well. So it's good to be aware of what you are required to do, whether you need to register. Though I won't go through each of these individual rights because of time, but there's a lot of information on the ICO website. And I'll just say now, the ICO is your friend. They're not there to penalise people who are doing their best. They are there to catch out the big companies who are being reckless with personal data. They're not there if you're making a mistake and you've accidentally sent a fat-fingered email to somebody you shouldn't. You know, you're not going to be fined 4% of your global turnover for something like that. So hopefully that will reassure you a bit. Okay. Here's a little bit of information again about the lawful basis for processing personal data. And every piece of data that you process needs to have a reason for processing it. So largely that will be for the performance of a contract. You have a contract with your client to provide coaching services, and so that is your legal basis for doing that. Most of these others won't be of any interest. Some legitimate interests may be. That's basically you giving a business reason for saying why you need to process their data. And some things like processing finance information and keeping that for tax purposes, that will come under the category of legal obligation. So if you need to keep your tax records and invoices for 7 years, that's a legal obligation to do that. Zooming through, hopefully. I do get asked whether a coach is a data controller or a processor. And the distinction is really based on who decides what happens to the data. So if you're making decisions on where you're getting the data from, who you're collecting it from, and what you're doing with it, then you are very likely to be a data controller. And processing just means anything you do to personal data, whether it's electronic or based on paper. So if you're a solo coach and not working for a big company of coaches, you're most likely to be a data controller. If you were an associate, then there's possibility, if you're working for a branded coaching firm, then you might be a processor if they're passing the information to you. So there's a couple of distinctions there. We can look at the intricacies of that if we need to. So it's very unlikely that you would need to register as a data protection officer, and really I would advise against doing that, because if you call yourself a DPO, that confers on you a whole raft of other regulatory responsibilities, so it's not so wise to do that. If you are a data controller and you're processing data for more than just the basics of business, there are a couple of things you need to think about and have in place as evidence of compliance with data protection legislation. So we'll move on to that. So the question for UK-based clients is, do I need to register with the ICO? And it's very simple. If you're using a paper-based record only, you've got your little coaching logbook and you're just recording things like that, your paper-based records, then very much no, you don't need to register with the ICO. If you're doing anything electronic with personal data, and let's face it, who isn't? And if you're using Delenta and you're attaching, integrating lots of other apps and things with that, then it's best to do a self-assessment. It's very easy, it's on the ICO website, but there are a couple of points where you might pick the wrong option. If you are only processing data for the basics of business, you may not need to register with them. But having this as a guide is a really sensible thing to do. So even if you don't register with them and you decide not to pay the £40 a year, then it's good to follow their guidelines. So if you're just holding any more information about your clients and prospective clients and past clients, then think about things like session notes, even if you've only got them in written form, and all the apps that you're using, you might want to consider registering, and it will give you peace of mind. As I say, it's just £40. And the main reason that you're registering is to ensure that you're aware and operating within the regulation, and so that you're transparent and accessible to anyone who might wish to contact you and exercise their rights for their data protection. So here's a whole range of things that you may need to have in place as evidence of compliance and transparency for your clients. And it does feel like a lot of things, but some of them are pretty obvious and some of them can be combined. So if you look at the orange blobs there on the screen, the orange ones are the externally facing, the front facing evidence of your commitment to data protection that you give to your clients. So the ICO registration, if you decide that's what you need to do, that's publicly searchable, that can be searched. If you have a privacy notice, and we'll talk about why that's important, and a cookie policy, again, they are your external way of demonstrating your compliance and protection of data on behalf of your clients. Now, they can only be created if you've done a little bit of admin, sorry about that, guys, a little bit of admin to create a record of processing activity. And this is very simple. It is just a list of the kinds of processing that you do with data. So you'll include details of who you might be sharing data with, and what you do with it. So let me give you a few examples here. So for example, third-party processors. These are things that your data that you've collected is flowing through, or your client has put it directly in there for you to be able to access. So things like Delenta, any CRM system, things like Zoom and Teams and Skype. Again, personal data does go in those things. Your iPhone apps, email, signature apps, your calendars, although we can use the Delenta one. I know that Delenta also integrates with MailChimp. I use MailerLite at the moment. So there are a range of things there that they are processing data, and they're on your behalf. You're the controller, they're the processor. Okay, and moving on. So I'd suggest you actually create a folder. This is very straightforward. It's a GDPR or data protection compliance folder. This helps you store everything in one easy to access place. If, as the law requires, you need to document proof of the steps you're taking to comply with data protection, then you can just go to this folder and this is your evidence if you ever need it. This is what I have in mine. So I've just got very straightforward. I have my OneDrive, and what I've done for every app or third-party processor that I use, I have gone to their website, I have looked to see whether they've got a data processing agreement or addendum, and I have created it from the website into a PDF, and I've plonked it into this folder. And I've looked through them to check that they've got a couple of important things about processing in different territories, but I've put them all in one place. And that's really straightforward. And this leads me on to the next step, which is to build a record of the processing activity. And ultimately, this will help you build your privacy notice. Okay, so this is easy. You just need to get a little Excel spreadsheet going. And if you think about where your data is coming from, what data you're capturing, why do you need to use it? We'll find a lawful reason for handling that data. Is anybody else processing it on your behalf? Do you share it with anybody? How long do you need to keep it? Data retention schedule, and do you really need it? And that's a good question to ask, because you should only be storing data based on necessity. You should keep it restricted and limited to what you need, not what's nice to have. So should be quite a straightforward thing to do. And if you have staff, then it's worth just looking at this from an employee perspective and doing a separate list for staff data, because you've got things like staff applications for jobs, successful candidates and how long you might keep their data, information about employees and payroll, your former employees, for example. So just going through this very quickly, the source, how do you capture this data? Is it a lead magnet? Is it a subscription form? Are they paying via a third-party payment processor? So you might not have all the payment details, but you'll keep a record, a number of what, that relates to that payment. What kind of personal data are you collecting? Things to do with identity, last name, first name, username, ID numbers. You might have date of birth, all those sorts of things. You may be capturing the special category data that we talked about earlier. Contact data includes home address, email address, phone numbers, if you're collecting next of kin and emergency contact information, that kind of thing. You might have financial data, so payment card details. You shouldn't be keeping those, by the way, on your files. So once you've kept the transaction, then you don't need the actual payment details. And then there'll be some technical data as well to do with internet IP addresses, login data, browser types. You might not really want that, but through some of your systems, it will be capturing that information, and that should be in your cookie policy as well. Okay. And then moving on to your privacy notice, you'll have seen, this is an example of one where I work. You'll have seen lots of different examples of privacy notice. This is a layered one. As you pop open each of the lines, it'll tell you a little bit more detail. They can be very complex. I've seen some really cool and groovy ones that are really very chatty and reassuring, but they have to have certain basic elements to ensure they're compliant with the law. And I really can't say fairer than using the ICO template. It's definitely a good place to start to make sure it has everything in it that you need. And as I say, if you're going to get it, if you put it together and get it checked by a lawyer or a privacy pro, then it will be quicker and cost less if you've got a strong starting point. So think about what your client or prospective client would want reassurance about. If you're collecting children's personal data, maybe you work with young people, then you've got to take particular care to ensure that the privacy notice is understandable by them using clear and plain language. So here it's not very clear, actually, sorry, the privacy policy template from the ICO website, it's got everything in it that you need and you fill in the gaps. So the type of information you collect, and you've already captured that in your record of processing table that you've just written. It tells you all of the legal basis for storing data, and you'll put a table in there. Whoops, sorry. And you've got, it details their data protection rights, and it also tells them how to complain, who they need to go to if they have a worry, a complaint, and you would put your supervisory authority details in there as well. If you're in the US, there are other state and sector privacy laws that might apply, so you need to get advice on those. It's quite a few because it's not one federal law. And in terms of how to display this, just a link to a PDF on your website is enough. And I sometimes get asked if you have a Facebook page, should you have a privacy notice? Now, because people are using Facebook, they've signed up to the Facebook privacy terms. But Facebook, in their terms and conditions, says that if you're collecting any personal data from your page, such as an email address for your mailing list, then you need to have a privacy notice within your Facebook page as well. So anybody with a website that collects any type of data needs a privacy policy. But if you are still doing everything on paper, you still need to be able to tell people how you process their personal data. So you may go and fill in a form at the dentist and they'll mention their privacy notice there and they'll say how they're capturing your data. They will ask for your consent to process it because it's medical related as well. And it's really good practice to have a go at trying this out on a few people to make sure they understand it and it answers the questions they might have, and try and keep it up to date whenever something changes. Okay. If you are a member of the ICF, or even if you're not and you just want to have a nosy, I don't know if you can get to it, but the ICF, International Coaching Federation, has got a guide to data protection with some quite useful information on it. So it talks about session notes, and you think about how long you might want to keep them. You might only want to keep them for a year. Do you even keep notes? Do you just keep a log of how many hours you've done with that client? Think about what you would do if your client requests copies of their notes from you. Is that, that's their right of access. Would you want to give those notes to your client? So create a policy for your records as to how you deal with this request. That's quite an important point, because if you're just making notes for your purposes and you wouldn't want them to see that, then should you be making those notes? For marketing as well, they do mention if you're using bulk emails and social media, then you may need to explicitly ask permission for people to opt in to marketing, and we'll come up to that in a minute as well, a little bit more detail there. Would you be sharing data about your clients with other parties? I'm not sure that you would, but there may be instances where you are. So just think about why and how you would do that.
I'd like to unmute myself and ask a question, if that's okay.
Of course, yes. Hello, is that Priya?
Hi, yes, this is Priya. So Lisa, thank you very much. I joined in a little late. I will be watching the recording for more, but this is very fascinating because I'm trying to work on developing something in the space of coaching. And it's going to be a digital portal, and this is very meaningful for me. So just listening to all of this, I just want to ask you, so when we sign up, when we say the privacy policy has to be signed or accepted, one tends to go to all these various apps. You see, all this small fine print that people, usually skip and just say accept without even reading it.
Yeah.
So that's my question to you.
Okay.
It's important that my clients have a sense of transparency and they know what they're signing into. How important is it to keep the font big, and how important is it that they actually do read it? And how can I make certain that they read it and then accept?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and there's a little bit I'll cover on that, specifically around marketing. But people don't need to accept a privacy policy, a privacy notice. Let's call it a privacy notice, because it's your notice of how you process their data. They can go and look at it if they want to. You're being transparent. They don't need to accept it. If you're talking about cookie policies, then there's a whole suite of other regulation around cookie policies. And some of that is dependent on where you live, where you operate, and who you're targeting. So that's actually quite a big area and changing all the time. But in terms of expecting people to say they accept the terms of the privacy notice is wrong. They don't need to do that. You're telling them how you process data for information. And you're also explaining that your legal basis for why you and how you process their data, the reason you're allowed to process their data. They only need to tick something if they're consenting to something. Now, they don't need to consent to a privacy notice. Okay, because that's
I see.
providing.
I thought they have to accept that as part of your terms and conditions.
No, the terms and conditions of your website along the bottom, you usually have a privacy notice, terms and conditions, and a cookie policy all along the bottom.
So all these three are different things and they're different documents.
Three different things. The terms and conditions of your website are basically allowing them to use the website and not abuse it. And this is what you do with the website. So by entering into those terms and conditions, and they're able to use the website and they know why. If a privacy notice is just you explaining how you process their data, and it's not just the data that's in the website, that's the thing, it's the data as a business that you're processing. So it should allow for the different stages of the customer journey. So you've got prospective client looking at the website, well, you'll process the data here at that point, and you've got that specifically detailed on your privacy notice. If they're a client, you process the data under the contract that they have with you to do this, to provide your services. You may also be processing their financial data because they've paid you. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. With the cookie policy, is an information piece, but actually now we're starting to see a lot of very interactive cookie banners. And in some territories, for example, in France, I forget what you have to do, but you can decline all cookies, whereas we can't do that now. In other places, you can state which cookies you are happy to accept because they allow the functionality of the site, but you don't want any tracking cookies, for example. So they're slightly different, and I won't be going into a lot of detail on cookies today. It is quite a scary subject, and it is very movable. But I hope that's made it a little bit clearer for you, Priya.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, moving on.
Thanks for the questions, Priya. One just follow-up question, Liz, on that point. Like when you talk about the whole process of customer journey. So when going to that sort of Delenta world of how we capture the data, exactly what you're talking about, right? When you interact with your potential clients to the landing page of taking bookings and where you capture the data. So so being on Delenta, do you sort of believe you can make things much easier and streamline the entire journey, the way how we capture the data and store? Right.
Absolutely. So, I, for example, have my Delenta profile page in my website, but it's got my calendar that goes straight into Delenta, and they can book my programs straight from there. I had a website, having the profile page designed into my website was fantastic. I didn't necessarily need to have a website, I'd already got one. So I could have just opened up with having my Delenta profile, and then people can instantly book an appointment with me. My privacy policy or privacy notice is on there in the footer, and the website terms of use and cookie policies and everything pops up accordingly. So I've not got an issue with that. I think it's really streamlined. And then they're interacting with you. What you do with the information once they've signed up and become a client or a prospective client or a lead within the system, you can manage that very easily, and then send them communications from within Delenta. That's really good. And of course, the integrations as well with Zoom, and I don't use MailChimp, but other people do. That makes it really easy, but then it's easy to identify who are your third-party processors as well, and just add them to your privacy notice. So it's really easy, Sam.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah.
So here's the biggie. So looking at marketing, and so GDPR is one thing in terms of people's data and data protection, but there's another thing that sits alongside GDPR, and so it can often be a bit confused with it. And this is the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations, and soon to be called the e-privacy regulations. I think they're still in consultation. So these give people specific privacy rights in relation to electronic communications. So there are specific rules on marketing calls, emails and texts and faxes, cookies, keeping communication services secure, and customer privacy around traffic and location data and various things. So we're looking at when you need consent for email marketing. So under PCR, you need to have consent to send email marketing to anybody who's an individual subscriber. So that's people who've personally subscribed to you for communications. They've given you their email address. But you don't always need consent for that. There is a soft opt-in. So if they're a customer, or they have been in negotiation for a sale, then it may be that you can have their email address to negotiate for that sale or that contract, and then retain that information and send them related marketing information. So only about what you've been talking about, not that, you know, you can't suddenly send them something about buying a new car, for example. You're a coach, they're talking about coaching. But this then means you have to allow them to unsubscribe at every point at which you communicate with them. So at the beginning, they can unsubscribe. When you send them an email, they need to be able to unsubscribe. So it's very clear if they haven't physically opted in, except they're talking to you about using your service, and you continue to communicate with them, they need to be able to unsubscribe. I hope it follows, everybody can follow that. That is called the soft opt-in, and I believe it may well be tightened up on at some point. If you're sending marketing emails to business contacts, so you're doing B2B marketing, it doesn't actually count, it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't apply to B2B. Okay. And when we're talking about consent, and we'll go through some examples of this in a couple of slides as well, consent has to be freely given. It's got to be specific. It can't be bundled up. It's got to be informed, and it needs to very clearly indicate an affirmative action that this person wants to be sent information by you. So freely given, they've got choice and control. Informed, you're telling them why you're collecting their data and what you're going to do with it. And it needs to be very clear and unambiguous. They're ticking a box, they're signing their name. Okay, so they're the basics. Let's look at some examples. So here's one. So if you're just asking them to sign up for a newsletter, put their email address in the box, it's not a big problem here. That's quite a good example to follow. It's simple. The simpler it is, the more subscribers you're going to get. They've also got their privacy policy. I'd call it a privacy notice, but that's just semantics. They don't need to add any checkbox to that because that's all good practice. It's all been done. But there is a little bit of a wobble on this one, because it says here, after signing up for the newsletter, you will also receive occasional surveys and special offers from us and our partners. We're not going to sell or distribute your email address to a third party, except they are doing it with their partners. So that's a bit of a wobbly one there. I'm a little bit dubious about that. So I would have said, to avoid any misunderstanding, it would have been better if that text was up at the top and it would have just said, get the latest weekly science news, occasional surveys and special offers delivered to your inbox. And that would have been clearer and more concise. They don't need to tick a box, they just put their email address in. Okay, one example. Here's another one. This one is a bit of a funny one. I'm not entirely sure if this is targeted at consumers or business people, because it's offering a media pack, but it was the first one I had to hand. So it's a good caution. This is fine. They're putting their name, address, sorry, their first name, last name and email in. Hearst is also going to email you about our products and services as detailed in our privacy notice. Tick this box if you'd rather not receive these emails. Now that's not okay. You can't ask people to opt out. That's a proper no-no. So I would say not the right way to obtain a subscriber's email consent. You don't actually have to ask them to opt in. So let's go to the next one. Here's another example, and this goes to partly to Priya's point as well. You don't necessarily need a checkbox. Checkboxes just get in the way, they're clutter. If you're going to get people to check lots of different things, they're just going to get confused and give up. So you'll get more conversions if you use fewer checkboxes. So in the first box, it says, I agree to my email being stored and used to receive the newsletter. Completely unnecessary because they're putting their email in to get the newsletter. So no problem there, just don't need it. The second email checkbox isn't needed because if you're going to send them a newsletter, you can put the offers in your newsletter. There's no law against it. You know, newsletter, lots of news, nice offers in it. So there's really no point having those particular checkboxes in there. I hope that's clear. I've got a couple more of these. This is a nice compliant opt-in form. It's explicitly clear how often subscribers are going to get newsletters and what their emails are going to be about. It also gives a link to the privacy policy here, and they said you can opt out at any time. So that's nice and tidy. Shouldn't be any issue there. No need for any checkboxes. And here's one with a lead magnet. So it's very common to use a lead magnet to give away something for free as an incentive in exchange for an email address. So Claire here has an example. She's very clear and explicit. She includes the incentive, so what you get by signing up. She's explaining consent. She's explaining the unsubscribe option. And she's also mentioned the privacy policy. And actually, she's done it, she's a writer, she's done it in nice, accessible language as well. So she's done it in a friendly way, although it's a boring thing to have to do, and we've seen it 100 times before. She's done it in a neat way. Okay, so you can't just obtain an email with a lead magnet without explaining how you're going to use the email and tell them what they're going to get for it. We don't need to add a checkbox for a free giveaway. But the checkboxes are necessary if you want consent for 2 or more separate things. And then just a note on this thing called double opt-in. It's not necessary. Some people think you have to have a double opt-in in GDPR terms to make it more compliant. Well, you don't. The only thing that matters is the ability to prove that you've got consent to marketing. So you can track it usually with your email mailing service. You should get a timestamp or something of when they subscribe to your service. That's all fine. The double opt-in is really just a more advanced way of collecting an email address. You might want to put in a message to check that you've got their email address. You send them an email and add them another message with that. That's just a marketing message. They'll do another opt-in. It means they really do want to sign up for your service or your information. So it might just give you access to higher quality leads, if anything. Can't think of anything else to say on that. And then if you really want to go the whole hog, and you're using quite a complex offer, and you've got lots of different strands of marketing, different products, different topics, or different sign-up services, then you might want to include a marketing preferences page as well, so that the user then has control on the frequency of things that they get, or the type of information that they get from you. So again, it's very clear and easy to understand. And what you're aiming to do is to ask for consent separately for each specific purpose when you need it. You get them to actively opt in, and they don't use pre-tick boxes. You can't get them to opt out. You're making the request for consent prominent and separate from terms and conditions, so they're not tied up in that. And you're telling individuals they can withdraw their consent at any time. They're the main principles really to follow. Okay. Now, got about 1.5 minutes left. Keeping data safe. This is really important for paper records and electronic data. So, you know, really a data breach can occur if you leave your laptop on a train, you leave a notebook in your car and your car's broken into, You know, nobody wants that to happen. So make sure you're on top of who's got access to what data you're processing. Restrict who's got access to your IT systems and your buildings. Don't keep data for any longer than you need to. And stay on top of the personal data that you hold, because that will help, that will save time. If you're thinking about cyber attacks, they don't just happen to big companies. Small companies can be attacked by phishing scams. And for example, so be really careful when you get a link that you're not expecting. Remember to back up your data, use strong passwords, make sure you've got antivirus stuff up to date, lock your screen when you're away from your desk, and make sure your Wi-Fi is secure, particularly as we're all working from home at the moment. And when you're chucking out that old laptop that you no longer use, rather than just smashing it up with a hammer, do make sure you get it sorted out and cleared properly. You can get professionals who can clear data from laptops as well. Okay. And then if all goes horribly wrong and something happens, basically you're looking at risk. What is the risk for that individual if their personal data has been lost or shared inadvertently? So it can be accessed through a phishing email. It could be totally accidental. You just sent a fat finger email to somebody, you know, by accident. You've lost your device, or it's been altered, or it's not available. And if banks actually go offline and data is unavailable for an amount of time, that is regarded as a data breach actually, because it's not available anymore. So it's all about risk. And should you tell the individual what's happened, it's always good to be open and upfront if you can. If it's a very minor thing, you don't necessarily need to. If it's something more major, then from the moment that you find out about the breach, you have 72 hours to report it to the ICO. You might just want to let them know this has happened and you're investigating it, and then follow up, but that's the best thing to do. It is on a case-by-case basis, and it's always worth keeping a log of near misses, so that if it's a system-related thing or a process, you could stop it happening again by a double check mechanism somewhere in what you're doing. It's a really good idea to keep a log of near misses, just for your own training and information and for improving your processes. So I think that's probably about it, because I've just about finished now. Just a final point, if you're going to take the time to work out how you're processing your client's data, you can put these compliance steps in place, and then your clients will trust that you're treating their personal data with respect and confidentiality, in as much as you do with the coaching relationship that you have.
Awesome. Beautiful, Lisa. Thank you so much. And
Pleasure.
you got some good compliments in the chat as well. And I can see.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions that you want to ask from Lisa while she's here? I mean, you can always post.
Lisa, hi Sam, I got a question.
Sure.
Hi.
Hello, who's talking? Is that Krishna?
Yes, thank you. My question is, I have only profile hosted in Delenta, and I have pretty much covered what you have shown in the privacy aspect. I've pretty much covered that in my normal contract. I put it there, what personally identify information I use and what cases I give to authorities, etc. So do I still need a privacy notice to be posted on the Delenta profile?
Ideally, yes, and I forget now if it's on the standalone. Sammy, you can probably back me up here. Is there a Delenta privacy notice? It's probably there, but I need to double check that. It should be at the point at which that person is interacting with you, ideally. So they know that by, for example, if your profile, you're asking them to contact you through the calendar and make an appointment, they need to know where that data is going and that you're processing it. So that's the most transparent way to do it.
Understood. So in this regard, we do have to maintain our ICF log, right?
Yes.
So that needs to go in there, in the privacy notice.
Your ICF log, that's right. And I just mentioned that in the contract, to be fair, as well. So it doesn't necessarily affect the people that are prospective clients, because you're just having a discovery call with them. but you know, they may need to know that you've got their phone number for the discovery call, or you're talking to them on Zoom.
Yeah.
Client, then absolutely you can say, I will be keeping a record of your email address in case the ICF do an audit. And I've not heard of anybody having one lately, and they did change their regulations recently as well, so it's worth looking on their guide to keeping a log, just to see how frequently they might do that. But it may be just a spot check. I don't think they do it with everybody. I think it is just an audit spot check that they do. You could
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, just to further to sort of go into the detail of the platform, you know, you can add your terms and conditions into the, you know, coaching package area and areas like that, where when they do transaction, they can check your privacy policy through that. You have that facility. And in terms of the data, we encrypt the data in our platform, and also in the, you know, it's an ISO 27001 certified infrastructure. So from the security and governance point of view, we have covered those stuff. Questions? Yes. Thank you for the question, by the way. It's a good question.
Any more questions?
Hopefully this, I mean, I think you covered quite a lot.
It was a lot, wasn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, there's a lot of things there. And again, thanks a lot for joining in. And Lisa, again, thanks a lot for sharing your wisdom with us and spending that last hour sharing your knowledge, experience on GDPR. So hope this is really, really useful for you and help your coaching business as well. We have another event coming up. We, like I said, Elevate Coaching Series is to elevate your coaching businesses. So that's the idea. And we have 2 events we do every month. So end of the month, we have another one to talk about how you scale your coaching business and your positioning and the commercial aspects and productivity. Those are the 3 points that we're going to talk about in the next event. So if you're following our social media pages, and if you're in the community, of course, you will get access to all the recordings, etc. So follow us and make sure your email address in our list, so we will let you all know when those events are available.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Sam and the Delenta team. It was really real pleasure to be here and share the love of data protection. Hopefully I've managed to iron out a few worries, but it is a big area, so you know, don't get too bamboozled by it.
Absolutely. No, we love that. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Again,
Pleasure.
thank you very much, and let you carry on with your day or evening or night, all that, and see you in the next event. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.